Hello. Next up, we have Farai Chideya. She is an award-winning journalist and contributor to WNYC. Here we are. Thank you.
Hello. Can I get a louder hello? Excellent. Well, I appreciate that because I'm going to be talking about the power of hello in the context of gentrification and neighbors. So basically, there's that line from Jerry Maguire, "You had me at hello." And this had me at hello. It's the neighborhood where I live, where people are house proud, and you can see that they decorate for holidays. It's a really amazing neighborhood called Crown Heights. And those of you who live in Brooklyn know that Crown Heights has had quite a history. This year actually is the 20th anniversary of the Crown Heights riots, where the Hasidic Jewish population and the West Indian population were engaged in a pitched battle. Since then, many things have changed. The economy has changed, the neighborhood has changed, and there is an incredible resilience to Crown Heights that I want to talk about in the context of the bigger issues that we're all facing. There's conversations about the 99% and the 1%, but there's also got to be conversations between different parts of the 99%. 99% is a big number, and many of us will find ourselves going up and down the income ladder, up and down the wealth ladder, moving communities, learning how to deal with new people. And hello is a simple and effective tool. Let me just give you an example before I move on. So I was walking down the street just a couple nights ago, and this very petite elderly woman was carrying all these bags. I mean, she must have had literally 6 bags in each hand. And so she stopped for a second to put them down. I could only see her from the back, and I said, would you like me to help you carry them? And she said yes, and so I was carrying, first I started out with one handful of her bags, and then I said, well, I'm younger and stronger, not young. Let me take all of her bags. Man, those things were bricks. Everything in them was liquids. I don't know if it was orange juice, ammonia, whatever. I mean, I was struggling just to get down the street after this little old lady. Well, we end up living in the same apartment building, and she has lived there since 1969. Which makes her tenure in that building about as old as my life. And she's got beautiful pictures of her family. Her husband's passed away. She's got 6 kids who've all moved out to the suburbs. And she said, I don't want to leave. I've got everything I need here. I've got the bus. I've got transportation. I know my neighbors. And what I found when I moved to this neighborhood from many years in Manhattan is that people still speak to each other. Revolutionary. They say hi. They greet each other. There are many places in New York, not just in Brooklyn, where people do this, but it was a marked difference from, basically I lived kind of in an NYU dorm. It wasn't really an NYU dorm, but everyone had just graduated from NYU. No one spoke to each other. The hallways, the mail area was filled with mail for people who had lived there briefly and moved out. It was a totally transient neighborhood, unlike this one. So, let me talk about gentrification and hello. So this is my neighborhood. Oops, sorry, I'm pointing in the wrong direction. This is an example of the diversity, some Hasidic Jewish men and African-American passengers sharing the subway station. And this is basically where Jackie Robinson used to play. Ebbets Field has become a monstrous housing development, not always great architecture. There's a Jackie Robinson school. This is my goddaughter, Ababitu, in the Botanic Garden, which is right on the edge of Crown Heights. She's cute, it's cute, they're cute together. Another beautiful picture of that, Medgar Evers College, which is right in the heart of Crown Heights. And then, I've only been there a couple years, but I started seeing new faces. White people, walking to work, crossing the street, walking their dogs, running, and not even running away from anything, just running. So Crown Heights has begun to change, and it brought up the question for me of, how do you make gentrification better? And it brings me back to this question of hello. What do you know, and who do you know? Now, many people have started writing about the gentrification of Crown Heights, and there are many neighborhoods all over America where there is gentrification, what's called reverse white flight. People returning to urban centers because, in the suburbs it can be harder to have transportation, it can be harder to live a sustainable life. Cities are actually much more ecologically efficient than sprawl. And so now you can get raspberry ganache, cakes in Crown Heights, which was kind of unthinkable not too long ago. But I talked to a real estate agent who's African American, and she was telling me that a lot of times as she continues to shop people around to different landlords, not things like these sort of big pop-up buildings, but the smaller private homes, she finds that people have a bit of disdain or a bit of attitude about moving to Crown Heights. Maybe it's because they suffered an economic setback and they just need cheaper rent, or they got priced out of an area like where we are now, Williamsburg, and decided to go down Bedford Avenue, or any other reason. But what she senses sometimes is that people think that the very presence of moving into a neighborhood like Crown Heights makes the neighborhood better, and they are the ones bringing the goodness. And the reality is that Crown Heights already has a lot of goodness, and the goodness will come when new and old neighbors integrate. I mean, I'm part of gentrification. Just because my skin is brown doesn't mean that I'm not part of this wave of people who have moved out of Manhattan or moved out of other parts of Brooklyn. I might be a little more inconspicuous when I go to get my morning coffee at the bodega, but I don't represent the history of Crown Heights. And again, it's really about the attitude that you bring to your community. And I think it's really important to understand some of the economic aspects of why communities constantly change. The part of the neighborhood where I live is predominantly West Indian and Caribbean, folks who are classified as black, and black unemployment is incredibly high. And that means people's homes are at jeopardy if they're paying a mortgage and find themselves unemployed. People's livelihoods are at stake. So there is, people who might not have taken in tenants who are mortgage holders might say, well, okay, we're going to move everybody downstairs and start renting the upstairs. You can also see that this is from a book called Black Wealth, White Wealth, that there's a profound wealth differential even among people who may earn the same amount of money. More than 60% of African Americans have negative assets. Negative assets. They owe more than they have. And even 20+% of white Americans are the same way. And what you see is if you move to a neighborhood like Crown Heights, a neighborhood in transition, I think of many different neighborhoods in the past, neighborhoods like Logan Circle in DC, there are always tensions when people who have more means move into an area where people traditionally have had less means. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it's important to understand sometimes people who move into a new neighborhood do get static. And there's a presumption, for example, that the people moving in from the outside have life easy, which may not be the case. But the reality is that, there's sometimes a two-sided defensiveness. And what that does is undermine our ability to live with each other. But we can change that. So, the question is, are these hard times or good times? And living in this neighborhood has let me know that it's both. There is a big annual festival, the West Indian Day Parade. And so people get together kind of in a huge mass. People come from all over the city and hang their signs from the different countries outside of buildings. And so those were a couple pictures I took, and the next pictures are taken by someone here in the room, Ajit Jagdale, a friend of mine, an amazing photographer. And so he set out to really look at, the amazing variety of people, different sizes, different aspects, people selling their wares, people getting a little dirty, a little frisky. And of course, there's the regal aspect to this celebration. People for a day can be a king or a queen. And so one of the things I've appreciated about living in this neighborhood is that pageantry, that the woman that you see in a headdress one day, you might see in church clothes the next day. And yet there's always tensions even for me. You know, this neighborhood during the whole West Indian Day celebrations can be incredibly loud. The same church-going neighbor might drag a sound system out into the street and you'll be up till 6 o'clock in the morning because they're DJing for the neighborhood, but that's all part of the price of admission. So don't think that I'm anti-gentrification, because this is an example from my own family. This is my mother's house on the left. This is part of her garden. This is in Baltimore, Maryland. And here's another part of her garden, but you might notice something in the background, which is that there's this house where the windows are blown out. It's abandoned, right next to my mother's house. And this never would have happened before some of the housing crises, but it's also demographic change. You know, Baltimore is far unlike New York, far unlike Crown Heights, a city that has experienced massive population decline. So these houses are now too big for people, and this house in particular was turned into an unlicensed group home, and then when it was shut down, some teenagers went in and set a fire, and it burnt down, and now it's about to be, you know, demolished. It's been very painful to see that happen to the neighborhood, but the good news is there is regrowth. This is the sort of abandoned commercial district, and a very boring picture of people in a community meeting. This gentleman got up to say that there's a development project, and at the time it was in jeopardy. And houses had already been torn down using eminent domain to build a new development, but that development was in jeopardy. And he said, "You mean to tell me they sacrificed their houses for nothing after 6 years?" And so these are the kind of fights that happen in places outside of New York or places that don't have population density. But the good news is, even there can be regrowth. There can be the promise. It's a harder path in some ways than what we call gentrification. I would prefer to think of it as neighborhood transformation. But transformation will always happen in many different ways, and I don't think it's a bad thing when communities begin to change their texture. It's simply a fact of life, but how we treat each other, whether or not we speak to each other, whether or not we carry someone's bags, are a sign of how engaged we are with our communities. And we are living in a time of upheaval. We are living in a time where many people are experiencing tremendous losses, not just in jobs, but also, you know, in the way that they think about themselves as a result of employment. But the world is still a place of joy and promise. And I think that conversation leads to community. This is a street fair in my neighborhood, and these little kids were like, "Come on, dance with me, dance with me." And I was like, "Oh, you know," and they were like, "Come on, come on." And, you know, I ended up dancing in the middle of the street. That, to me, is the joy of community. You have to be at home in your hood and in the world. So that idea of conversation leading to community has done me well many places. I got to go to India a couple years ago, and I have no idea what this game is. Somebody has to tell me, but I was staying in the Four Seasons where there were gates and, you know, machine guns, and I said, "I'm going to go out for a walk." And they were like, "No, no, 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 don't go out for a walk." And I was like, "I'm going to go out for a walk." And, you know, so I went out for a walk. I saw these kids, wore my basement Bhangra t-shirt in India, which I thought was fun. People were kind of curious about me. And I ended up being invited into the home of a family and having lunch with them. And it was one of the last days of my trip, and it just brought tears to my eyes. It does now. It's like if you speak to people, they will speak back to you. Life is not without its risks, but it's with deep joys. And so I would end the way that I started. Hello. Thank you.